Well, welcome to the Wealthy Speaker University podcast. My name is Jane Atkinson, and I'm the author of the Wealthy Speaker 2.0. I'm joined today by host of the Iron Jen radio show, Jen McDonough. Jen is one of the most remarkable graduates of the Wealthy Speaker University. And to get us started, Jen, I'd love to turn the table around on you. You're going to be interviewing me today, but I'd love to ask you the question, what was your biggest aha from the Wealthy Speaker University?
Oh, well, thanks for having me on today, Jane. It is an honor to be asked that question and also to get to pick your brain today. My biggest takeaways from the Wealthy University was definitely finding the value in what I can give to people and finding the value in myself. So for me, that was finding my lane, picking my lane and what my expertise was, and then really finding out that, hey, we don't blast ourselves out as speakers. We set ourselves up as the expert. And I think you did just a marvelous job on teaching us how to set ourselves up as that expert and finding out how to get paid for that.
Nice, nice. And, we have people on the line listening who are just starting out, and we're going to share a bunch of tips on how to get paid to speak. And for those people who might be listening who have been in the business a while, love to give them lots of ideas that'll just kind of take it to the next level for them. So let me turn it over to you, and we'll start into our Q&A mode.
Fantastic. Well, Jane, first off, what do you think the most important thing to know for getting booked as a speaker if you're just first starting out?
Well, I think the learning that you expressed that you got from the university was about picking a lane. I think that there are speakers who come my way as a coach, come through my world, and they have several different ideas of what they could speak on or potentially write a book about or so on. And so I think the most important first step is to what we call pick a lane. And when I say pick a lane, I mean pick a lane topically. It's not necessarily to one audience or drilling it down to a niche at this point. It may be too early to do that. But what we really want to do is assess where your passion can meet profit, i.e., what topic are you most passionate about and what topic can you get paid on? And we hope that they can come together and be one and the same. So I have something in the Wealthy Speaker 2.0 book that it's called the Focus Form. It allows you to kind of go through that in more detail. But basically, I think that's job one, is picking a lane.
Jean, do we need to write a book first, or should we just start speaking?
That I think is a little bit of a chicken and egg idea, because I've had many people in my world over the past 20 years do it either way. So they've gone out, they've started to build a business speaking. They might be out speaking, say, 50 times a year. Well, let's say you do that over 2 years and you have an average audience of a couple of hundred people. Well, if you think about the revenue lost by not having a book to sell at the back of the room, that can add up to tens of thousands of dollars. So I think what you probably want to do, first of all, we're going to go through the process and we'll share more about that, what that process really looks like. But really picking a lane and knowing what it is that you're most passionate about is so essential, because that's what you want to write the book on. So I would say make sure you're really clear on what your brand and your marketing is going to be before you decide on the book, so that the book will help support what we call your empire. So I'm going to say speak a little bit first, get super clear, and then write your book. How's that?
That sounds fantastic. Now, Jane, here's the big one. So a lot of us have a lot of different topics that we talk on. So perhaps we may have 10 different topics. How do we market that, and who do we market that to? How does it go?
Well, my recommendation is that you don't. Number one, a confused buyer never buys, so you're probably offering them too many things. But when I look at someone's website and they have 10 different topics, what goes through my mind, let's say I have my decision maker cap on or my meeting planner cap, what goes through my mind is no one can be good at all of those different things. So there's a joke in our industry, if your topic list is as long as your client list, then you're in big trouble. So we really want to narrow down your topics, and this goes back again to what we were referring to earlier, of picking a lane, and all of your topics should revolve around your lane. So let's say that your lane was leadership. If you were to talk about leadership from 2 or 3 different vantage points, it would all make sense. You know, leadership building teams, leadership, leadership and the art, strategy or something like that. I would even like to see people kind of hone down, say, a broad topic like leadership into one specific area of leadership. So the more finite you can be and the less topics you have to kind of revolve around that. So another example might be that you have one talk that is for leaders and another talk that might be for frontline staff or associations. So you may have the same talk, but you're going to adjust it obviously based on the audiences that you are delivering to. So be thinking about how you can narrow it maybe to about 3 topics total.
Thank you. How do we get known as a speaker?
Well, I have a process in the Wealthy Speaker 2.0, and this is really the basis of all of the work that I do, and it's also the format that the university runs under. And the process is ready, aim, fire. And I'm hoping that people listening at home will be taking some notes and they'll write down ready, aim, fire. And let me explain what each of those means. Ready is where you get crystal clear on what you're selling. So this is in the ready stage, we pick a lane, we develop some language that actually allows people to understand very, very quickly how we're going to help solve a problem for them. One of the great questions of the ready stage is, what do I want to be known for 5 years from now? And if people really think about what they want to be known for 5 years from now, that will allow them to really reach out and start moving in that direction right away. You know, some people will come to me and they've been doing 3 or 4 different things for several years. So they have momentum building, but building in several different directions. So we'll try to think about that 5-year goal, and they may have to start slowly weaning themselves off some of their revenue streams in order to get where they ultimately want to go. When you're out speaking on 5 different topics, no one is going to know you for one thing 5 years from now. So in the ready stage, we get crystal clear on what we're selling. Then we move into aim, and that's where we develop marketing materials that include that clarity. And that really, for the most part, we're dealing with websites. Some people put together paper packets, but really paper is starting to go by the wayside, and I focus mainly on websites because without a website, you're not really in business. And if I go to your website, I should be able to tell within 15 seconds how you are going to help me. So be thinking about websites and making sure that it passed that test, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then and only then do we move into fire, and that's where we roll it out to our target market. So we have a couple of ideas in mind. We might choose 1 or 2 industries that we're going to go after, and then we're going to roll that out to our target market. So Jen, you're a good example of that. You have people on your industry list, such as emergency first responders, and so that's a focus for you in your outbound fire process. But you, Jen, have already gone through ready and aim, and now you'll be firing on a continual basis for a period of time.
It was definitely a worthwhile process going through that journey, so thank you, Jane.
Right. Imagine trying to fire without having ready and aim.
It's just like spraying bullets at the air. You're never going to hit anything.
Exactly.
So, Jane, I think a lot of us out there, when we're starting out at the beginning, we're thinking, can we really make a living as a speaker? I mean, is this really possible? And if so, how do we find a topic we can speak on?
Well, I think that goes back to that question about what do we want to be known for 5 years from now? and also what are we passionate about and can also get paid on. So I think the second part there is really more the answer to your question. What will people pay you? What problem will people pay you to solve? What problem will people pay you to solve? So if you have a topic that people just aren't really interested in, or people aren't used to being paid for or paying for, then I think you've got some soul searching to do to see whether or not professional speaking is really for you. Some people will want to just get out there and speak because they have a message, they have a story, and people really want to hear it. A lot of people will get called or pulled into speaking because something has happened to them. So I have several people in my world as coaching clients or university members who have gone through some sort of tragedy. So I have a woman who had survived breast cancer, went on to run a triathlon, and 2 weeks later had a heart attack. And, how did she manage to get through all of that? And then I have other clients who have been in climbing accidents where they've lost both of their legs. I have another client who was born without any arms. I mean, there's all kinds of situations that kind of pull people towards speaking, because what will happen is my client with who lost his legs, for instance, he was out climbing mountains a few years later, and people would say, dude, how did you do that? What on earth, how did you not just curl up in a ball when all of that happened to you? And so he was really all about perseverance and really overcoming adversity, and he really got pulled into the speaking business. So I'm not saying that you have to have something tragic happen to you, but I think that people need to think about what have they done in their life over and over again that makes them credible to speak on that topic. And so it may be that you have excelled in your life at, some sort of customer service or something like that since you were a little kid delivering papers. You were always the kid who made the most money and got the most tips at Christmas time. That's something that you can think about. All right, well, I do know how to do that well. So there's several questions you can ask yourself. One is what do I want to be known for 5 years from now? One is, will people pay me to solve that problem? And I guess the third question would be, what have I done well in my life over and over again?
Jean, I think it's kind of interesting you bring that up, because a lot of times as we ourselves, we can't always see that value. And that's, for me, also another thing I meant to add is having you as a coach really helped pull that out. You can see that outside perspective.
Right. And, there is a saying, Jen, that I think is great. One of my clients gave it to me. You can't see the label from inside the jar. It's very, very difficult sometimes to identify what you have that would be valuable to other people if you're too caught up in it. And so I think sometimes somebody from the outside saying, well, what about that? And what about that? And, well, hang on, you've overcome this and over again. And what's your formula for doing that? Well, as a matter of fact, I actually, this is my process. And so really one of the things that I try to help people do fairly early on is develop their formula so that they can teach what they know to other people. So that's something that's also an important piece of it. And maybe some people get the formula before they even figure out what the language might be that markets that formula.
Sure. Jean, how does someone charge when they're just starting out?
Well, I think you have to start somewhere. It's going to be a little bit different for everyone. So I have clients who have come out of, let's say they are a professional golf coach, and they've won on the circuit many, many times, and they've got some great accolades behind them, and their bio is a little bit juicy. We might start them out at $10,000 in the industry, whereas someone else who's just kind of getting in, maybe they don't have kind of any notoriety or any biographical fame to speak of, we might start them out at $1,000 or $1,500. I kind of say in the Wealthy Speaker 2.0 that $1,500 is when I would maybe consider you starting to speak, quote unquote, professionally. So we try to make that be kind of the low. Anything under 15, you're just kind of dabbling. But people need to start somewhere, and there's you want to think about what is the value that you're providing. I have a client who has gone from 0 to 17,500 in under 3 years, and that is probably one of the quickest startups that I've seen. But he has all of the things, kind of laid out in front of him. He's got all of the right talents. His speaking is sublime. People love him. The corporations are clamoring to get him. He's sold out. Just turned down a TV show. I mean, this is kind of the extreme end of things in terms of the Wealthy Speaker. And I really wanted to update the book last year because so much had happened since I first wrote it 5-6 years ago, and the economy had been up and down. And so I really wanted to have a case study that showed it can be done. You can go from 0 to a million in 3 years if you do all of the things right and if you have kind of all of these talents. I would call Ryan, who is my kind of case study for this, he's a triple threat. He's a really great marketer. He's a really great salesperson, and he's killer on the platform. People just love him. So, I mean, I guess how much should you charge is really going to be based on where you're coming from starting out. If you have something on your biography like running a large company, coming out of a CEO role or something like that, then you might be able to start a little bit higher. But I think it's all relative. You just kind of have to look at where you are.
Sure. Well, Jane, when we start going out and we're beginning to contact places to speak, how do we know what's the difference between a keynote speaker and a workshop speaker?
That is such a great question, Jen. And I'm actually just writing a new book called The Epic Keynote: Presentation Skills and Styles of Wealthy Speakers. And so I've been gathering. I'm not a presentation skills coach, but of course you're not in the industry for 20 years without picking up a few things. And so I've brought in some of the best people in the speaking community to confer with on that. And so keynote speaking is you're really offering up high-level ideas. You're kind of at the 10,000 foot looking down rather than giving 10 of this and 20 of that and really like rolling up your sleeves like you might in a workshop. And I mostly deliver workshops, and so I have interaction within probably a minute of my workshop beginning, and it's always going to be interaction back and forth throughout the whole thing. Whereas a keynote speaker really needs to be prepared to stand up on a stage, because you will get to that part at some point in your career. You don't have that same level of kind of walking in and out of the audience. You really need to be able to command and own the stage. And you're talking higher level ideas, and the goal is that they all come back to something that people can walk away with easily and use. So let me give you the difference between kind of old school keynote and epic keynote. Old school keynote was someone telling lots of great stories, and people were just like, oh, that's beautiful, and crying, and really taking people on a roller coaster journey. And then new school keynote, which is Ryan, who's the example that I've used, is giving tons and tons of great takeaways, but it's not necessarily a list of here are 10 things you should do if you want this. It's more just kind of great idea after great idea. I think somewhere in between those, where you're wrapping those ideas around really memorable stories, and you have some sort of common thread, and Victoria Labalme calls it a through line, that kind of weaves it all together. And one of the great epic keynotes that I cite in the book was a Joe Calloway speech from years and years ago, where the name of the speech was Let It Go. And the premise of the speech was, what do we as speakers need to let go of in order to move to the next level in our careers? So he said at the beginning, there's not going to be 3 points in a poem. There's going to be one idea here, and the idea is let it go. And he came in and around at let it go from all different angles. And in the end, it was let it go, and in the beginning, it was let it go. Well, people are still talking about that speech. I think probably it's been 10 years, and
wow.
people will still remember that speech. That is the definition of an epic keynote. Whereas in a workshop, you might come away with a bunch of ideas and pages and pages and pages of notes. Does that make sense?
Jane, yeah, it does. Is there usually a fee difference?
Well, the way that I look at pricing is your keynote should be your lowest price, and then as you go up in time, it goes up from there. So let's say your keynote is $5,000. You might charge $6,000 for a half day, $6,500 for a full day. Or because really when you're at the lower fees, you don't want to go up in huge, huge chunks. It could be that your keynote is $5,000, your half day is $6,000, and your full day is $75,000. It just feels like it's a little bit much in terms of how much from the keynote fee to the full day fee. What I would really recommend that people do is have your fees not so far apart so that if it's only $1,500 more to keep you for the full day, it's really to everybody's benefit for you to do more than one activity. So let's say you come in and you open a conference, Jen, you deliver your keynote, then you might say, why don't I stay and do a workshop in the afternoon, and we're going to drill down on this idea that I've planted in the keynote. And I'm going to give them more really juicy roll-up-your-sleeve bits for that. It'll only cost you, from $5,000 to $6,500. It'll only cost you $1,500 more. Does that make sense? You're not really you're trying to make it attractive for them to say, well, it's only $1,500 more. I might as well book the full day.
And it's a little bit easier because you've already made that contact and they're already a client.
Exactly. And the more time you spend with the audience, the more time you spend with a group, the higher your rate of spin-off goes up. So your goal is to say, well, let me do 2 or 3 things for you. We're going to build that into the package. And that way, because really what's changed as the economy has gone up and down and dipped and rolled is that people are looking for way more return on investment than they used to be. It used to be they would spend $10,000 on a straight-up motivational talk, and that's all they would want from you. You fly in, do your talk, and then leave. Well, now that same talk, they want some meat and potatoes in the talk, and then they might want you to come in and talk to the board first or do some other things at higher levels. Maybe stay or come in the night before and attend one of the functions so people can get to know you. They might buy books from you and have you stay and do an autograph session after your session. Like, there's really more to it now than there was before, and value is really the name of the game.
Thank you, Jane. So what are some of the most important things we should have on our websites?
Okay, so now we're talking aim stage. So we were talking ready when we were talking about picking a lane and developing maybe some language that might revolve around that lane. And we can circle back to promise statements here after this, Jen. When I get onto your website, the first thing that I'm looking for is what problem do you help to solve? And so the language behind that I call the promise statement. Some people might call it a tagline. So let's say you're developing a promise statement or a tagline. You want it to be short and sweet. You want it to be outcome oriented. You want it to be about them and not about you. So the promise statement that we don't want is, hire me, I'm a great speaker. The promise statement that we might want is turning adversity into opportunity. Okay, so you see the difference? Hire me, I'm a great speaker. That's kind of speaker-oriented. But when we say turning adversity into opportunity, that's expert-oriented. And really what we need to remember is that speaking, for the most of us, is just one of the ways that we deliver our expertise. So, Jen, you probably have different revenue streams under your umbrella. We have this visual of an umbrella, and if anybody would like the umbrella, they can just email me, jane@speakerlauncher.com, and I'll shoot you over a PDF of the umbrella. The umbrella is really our business model, and what goes at the top of the umbrella is your lane or your idea. So in the middle goes the topics, and then flowing down off of the umbrella are the revenue streams. So Jen, let's talk about your business. You have keynotes as one of your revenue streams, correct?
I do. Coaching is another, and book sales is another, as well
Coaching
as
is another. Book sales is another. And as you grow your business, you'll probably have more and more revenue streams. So, I mean, just be thinking about how you deliver on your knowledge. That's, speaking is just going to be one of the things. And that's why we kind of come out as an expert for our overall business in our website rather than hire me, I'm a speaker. So you might have a brand, you might have a promise statement, and that really shares very, very quickly with the audience how you can help them solve a problem.
I was going to add, too, again, going back to the coaching thing, it's so hard to see when you're in it, but it's so interesting to have that coach kind of help pick that apart or help you through that, because a lot of times we're thinking me, or we're just not seeing the big picture sometimes.
Yes, and everybody has a coach. I have a coach, and I have had huge and valuable growth this year from being with someone who doesn't think the same way that I do. So it's all about, I think, how you think and just getting outside of your jar and really being able to see things a little bit more clearly.
And I think, too, seeing it as an investment, since we see it as such an expense.
Yeah. Hey, listen, before we finish on websites, let me add a couple more things on websites that I'm seeing more and more of. I have a few, I wouldn't call them pet peeves because I can kind of take them or leave them, but the slideshows or the carousels of revolving things, I think that those are I'm going to predict this. I predict that they're on the way out because I think they're cool to look at, but we don't want to sacrifice message for cool. So what I mean by that is, let's say you have a 3-part slideshow and you're selling kind of a different thing on each slide. I feel like you're really missing an opportunity to get one message across. So the more clear and simple your website can be, the more on your home page you can deliver some copy that speaks to what the problem might be for them and what your idea of the solution is, and maybe a little bit of credibility on your part. And I'm talking 1 or 2 lines on each of these. That would be better to me than having like something cool like a slideshow. So let's go back. What we want in that top banner on your website, we want to see your brand if you have one, your promise statement, which is like your tagline, and probably your name. And then down below that, we want to see something that really speaks to what their problem is and what your idea of the solution is, and a little bit of credibility about you. So those are some of the basics. And the other thing that I see a lot of is too many choices from the home page. So let's say you have 7 navigation tabs running across, and then each of them you have 4 drop-down lists, i.e. I scroll over those tabs and then I see more options. Well, that's giving us a heck of a lot of options from the home page. And going back to something that a famous copywriter says is, a confused buyer never buys. So we want to make it super, super simple for people to understand, where do you want to go first on the website? Where would you like to go next? What's the call to action? So make it simple, and rather than having drop-down lists, let's say under your keynotes and speaking tab, you've got all the options. Just let me click on keynotes and speaking, and then I'll see all the options right on the page. Does that make sense?
Fantastic advice, Jean. I think I was one of those people who had the 7 tabs and probably 5 under each. You're thinking choice. I want to give them choice, but
Yes.
It was really helpful to have you kind of feed into that and say, oh, make it the path of least resistance for folks.
Right, right.
Jane, how do we get booked as a speaker?
Well, this is part of the FIRE conversation. So FIRE is rolling out to our target audience. So number one rule of FIRE is to pick one or two industries to roll out to. So we talked about you being first responders, emergency worker types. You might pick insurance, you might pick real estate, you might pick like helping hands type audiences. That might be massage therapists or chiropractors or people like that. Teachers would also be considered kind of helping hands. You might pick healthcare. You might pick banking or financial services. I mean, there's all kinds of choices. So the idea behind this is that your outbound efforts have focus. Now, let's say if you pick healthcare and someone comes into you from the corporate world, from insurance, then you might say, sure, no problem, I can deliver for that. But what you're doing is you're really just focusing and trying to develop a reputation in one niche. So I have only ever spoken to groups of professional speakers and Toastmasters. Those are my two audiences. And even the Toastmasters that come, the majority of the people that would come to the session would be people who want to speak professionally. So professional speakers is it for me. So when I was starting to write the second book, The Epic Keynote, I was conversing back and forth with one of my friends and saying, I was thinking it could broaden my audience a little bit, and he really encouraged me to stick and write it for speakers, because when you're even writing a book or developing a keynote with more than one audience in mind, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to write your website with more than one audience in mind and trying to serve a whole bunch of different people. So think about, maybe it's corporate is going to be, obviously, you may have heard by now that that's really where a lot of the money is in terms of getting paid to speak, is in corporations or associations. And the beauty of working the association market is that leads you down the path of a lot of different corporate. And so that allows you to, so the first couple of years you might say, well, I'm just going to try and get out there and do anything I can to speak, and then I'm going to choose my market. That's okay too, but your outbound efforts won't have kind of like a clearly defined focus, and that kind of makes you wonder, well, what do I do when I get up, and get into my office in the morning? Where do I begin? Now, let me give you a couple of more FIRE ideas. You might start firing your formula out. So that's maybe like a 3-part formula that you've developed on what your idea. Let's say your topic is around a specific area of leadership, and you might have this 3-part formula that revolves around that. Well, you might write articles on this, and you might have them placed into the associations or the target markets that you'd like to see coming to you for speaking. So you might do a huge article push, maybe develop 2 or 3 different articles and push them out to various places. You can also be creating a bit of a presence through social media. A lot of people will do blogging, and that gets them some notice. So you really want to think about what do you do best. And if you're a really good writer, then the article idea and the blogging idea will be really good for you. If you're a really good marketer, then you might do more like maybe it's an old-fashioned direct mail piece or a postcard or something like that you put out to a specific target audience. And then maybe you follow up with a phone call. I mean, that is kind of old school, but I think that what we'll see happening is that things ebb and flow, and people are going to perhaps come back around to using the telephone again. You might also consider putting out a bunch of query emails to, maybe it's 7 or 8 different associations that are in the target audience that you want. So you're speaking on leadership, and maybe you want the insurance industry. So maybe you go out to a bunch of different insurance associations and say, this is my angle on leadership. Is that of interest to your audience? If you get a yes, then maybe you send them to the website and you move on from there. You make a phone call. There can be a whole process. So these are the things that we've outlined in the FIRE section of the Wealthy Speaker. And there's lots and lots of FIRE ideas that you can choose from, and you kind of choose the ones that are best based on what your style is and the things that you're really good at.
Jean, do you find that there's a better way of going about this? Should we be going through the Speakers Bureau, or should we be hiring someone to book our events for us, or should we just try to book our events ourselves?
Well, I will typically say to people, work for yourself for the first 3 years, because really the bureaus won't be that interested in you until they start to lose business to you. Okay, so once they hear Jen McDonough's name a couple of times, and then it's like, oh, who's this Jen McDonough that got the booking that I was working on, and I didn't get to book it, I didn't get the commission from that. That's when the bureaus will be most interested in you, when they hear your name from a client on 1 or 2 occasions, or a client calls and asks for you, and they don't have you listed in their database, then they're going to be interested in you. So I'd say go out and build a fan base and build a client base first, and then the bureaus will be more interested. And a couple of criteria for when you're ready for working with bureaus. Your fee would probably need to be a minimum of $3,500. Some bureaus might say higher than that, but let's say a minimum of $3,500. You need a really great video of you speaking. And you need to obviously have your website ready and be out speaking and doing it on your own as well. If you're right at the startup phase, then they may not be as interested in you. So that's a good guideline. In terms of hiring someone to sell you, it's a little bit of a slippery slope. I've seen lots of times it doesn't work, and that's because it's the blind leading the blind, meaning the person who wants to hire someone to sell them is hiring because they can't sell themselves. And so who's going to train the person properly to actually sell you if it's not going to be you? So I would really like to see speakers learning how to sell themselves, getting some sales skills, getting some marketing skills, and get out there and do it themselves for about 3 years before they tap into somebody outside selling them. And again, there's a whole big section in the book on that too.
Well, thank you. Jean, I know you've coached tons of people in the past, and you've gotten to see people's journeys, their careers go along. What are the top 3 mistakes that you see new speakers making?
Well, I'm really quite glad you asked that question, Jen, because I have a special report on speakerlauncher.com that addresses the 3 mistakes. So without going into a huge amount of detail, number 1 would be not working on their presentation skills enough, because the speech is your number 1 form of marketing. It is the best thing you can do for yourself, is to create a great speech. Number 2 would be when I go to your website, it says, hire me, I'm a great speaker. Rather than being an expert first, here's the problem I'm going to help solve, it's hire me, I'm a great speaker. So that's speaker first versus expert first. And then the third thing is that their website lacks a promise. And that's that tagline that we were talking about, maybe 5 or 7 words that really speaks to the outcome of your work. So I think that that's probably them. And if anybody wants to go and get the special report, it's at speakerlauncher.com. You'll see an orange circle, and you can click on that and get the report for free.
Fabulous, by the way, packed full of great content. I can't believe you're giving it
is
for
good,
free.
Isn't it, Jen? And we just reworked it, so it's really it's gotten a lot better even in the last little bit.
So, Jean, for a lot of us out there, we're sitting there thinking, how long is this going to take me before I can make enough to get a living? It's hard being patient sometimes, but can you kind of give us maybe a typical amount of time it takes?
Yeah. Well, I think you're going to find, Jen, and you are just an absolute, you're probably on the front edge of the speakers that I've seen kind of coming through the university. I think you might do it a little bit faster. I think the average is 3 years.
I thought you were going to say the most impatient.
No, you're not the most impatient. There's lots of people out there who are lacking in patience. And you know what? There are people out there, hucksters, you might say, who are going to try to sell you the fantasy. So there was just a big dialogue on a speaker I've known for years, Scott McCain's Facebook page. He got a letter from a speaker that said in one phone call, he could do these dramatic things with his income. And I really think that new speakers especially, and seasoned speakers, have to be aware that there is no magic pill. There's no silver bullet. There's nothing except doing the right things consistently that is going to get you there. So one of the great things that Ryan, who was the test case I told you about, going from 0 to nearly $1 million in 3 years, he had a little bit of momentum going into it. He was in a corporate job where he was able to speak in his corporate job. And so he was already building some momentum within the human resources community, which is where he started his career. So, I don't know that everybody could really do that. So really going from 0 to $1 million, I mean, it's quite unlikely for most people that they will ever have that level of success. But I think to build a good, healthy income, I think for most people it takes 3 years. And I'm sorry to say, Jen, it can't be done sooner. I haven't seen it done. Unless you have some sort of good head start.
When you look back on it, at the beginning, 3 years, when someone hears that, it's like, oh my gosh, it seems like forever. But really, when you look back on it and say, it was 36 months.
It goes pretty fast, and it's probably the same. I bet you if you looked up statistics, it's probably the same for most any business. It is a business. So. That's probably, if we were to circle back to what are the top 3 mistakes, one of the biggest mistakes might be that, I just love to speak. And people don't think of it as starting a business. It's a business. It's not a hobby.
Yeah. Jan, it kind of leads into my next question. So for those of us that have this message that we're just dying to share, but we don't have an idea of how to put a talk together, where can we go? Where can we go to start?
Well, I'll give you a little bit of a formula, and then if you feel like you need more, maybe we could talk about coaches or something like that. I don't do presentations coaching, but I do help people get focused, and I think that's probably the biggest problem for most people starting to write a talk. So I encourage people to start a 3-part formula, and that is, what did you do to get this result over and over again? What were the 3 main things that you want to tell people? So you chunk it down to 3s. Don't ask me why 3s work. They just do. And so if I were to give you like the easy peasy speech formula, it would go like this. Opening story, and this may be 3 to 5 minutes, and it's got to be a good juicy story that kind of draws your audience in. It engages the audience. Point number 1, and you can pepper lots of stories around that. Point number 2, point number 3, that's your 3-part formula. And then closing story. And that will be something that's kind of like a call to action and makes them want to get off their butts and go do something. So opening story, 1, 2, 3-part formula, closing story. How simple is that?
That's very simple. It's nice to hear. It's like, it is doable.
And in March 2013, we're going to map that out in the Epic Keynote book, and people will be able to tap in at the end of the book into the coaching section, which has it broken down into, if you need help with humor, here's where to go. If you need help with storytelling, here's where to go. And so my part in that is really just helping people focus and get their formula down. And so I kind of set the stage, and then if people need specifics, then we send them off to a coach.
Fantastic. So, Jean, we have a lot of us out here that have maybe done some talks for free, but we're just having a hard time making that transition, getting to be a paid speaker. What would be some of the suggestions you would have for that person out there?
I think we probably need to circle all the way back to ready and really look at what you're selling. And it could be just a confidence factor. You're out speaking for free in order to build your confidence in your stage time so that you feel comfortable asking for money that next time. So I do encourage people to get out and speak to anyone who will listen in order to develop the material. But you might say, okay, I'm going to do that for 6 months. Now I want to transition over and I'm going to start asking for fees. And really, we go back to ready. We make sure that our language and our marketing is crystal clear, that it sets us up as an expert, that we're doing this seriously. Then we make sure that our website is saying all the things that we need it to do. And then we get out and we find groups that will pay. So when you start with, it's kind of a bit of a pyramid. The lowest level of the pyramid might be your local associations who meet every month. So let's say, again, going back to healthcare. You might speak at your local healthcare chapters, and you might not get paid for that because they don't pay their local speakers. But then you go a step up to the state level or the regional level. You might be able to get paid there, and then you go up to the national level, and you might be able to get paid there. So as you go up the food chain with these organizations, local is kind of the least likely to pay, but it goes up from there. But really, never ever assume that people don't have a budget for speakers, because that might be their standard line that, oh, we don't pay for our speakers. You would be so surprised. I've been on the phone selling speakers the first 10 years of my career, and I can't tell you how many times people lied to me flat out and said, oh, no, we don't pay our speakers. And then I'll say, okay, well, let me just send you over this little bit of material, and if you decide that you have a budget, let us know. People will come back to us time and time again. Oh, yeah, we came up with $5,000. Surprise, surprise. Mm-hmm. So never really assume that you know what's going on at the other end, and never ever assume that they're telling you the truth. Because if they really want you badly enough, they will find the money. They might find a sponsor. They might take it from a different budget, or who knows. But often when people are motivated, they can make things happen. So I would say once you've gone through your cycle of freebies, going out and speaking to anyone who will listen, then you might just basically stand tall in your fees and say, you know what, I'm worth this amount of money, and I'm okay if I don't get that piece of business. I'm not going to deal in fear and say, oh, well, if I charge them, they're not going to book me. That's okay. If you win some, you lose some. I think overall the goal is for you to stand up confidently that you have the value to provide for that paycheck.
Jane, can people actually hear it in your voice? I know you talked about this in your book, and I believe we went through this in your coaching, but can people actually hear it in your voice if you're not that confident person who's sure of their speaking fees?
Well, I call it the little green man that sits on your shoulder and might say in your ear, this is your subconscious mind, oh, you're not good enough. Oh, they'll never have the money to book you. And if you let the little green man drive the bus and drive that conversation, you are in big trouble. You're kind of sunk because energetically, they can feel it, whether they feel it consciously or not. So what you want to do is you want to take that little green man off your shoulder, throw him to the ground, stomp on him with your foot, and say, no, I am driving this conversation. I stand tall in my fields. I stand tall in the confidence that I can bring the value to your organization. And if you take that into a phone call, that's why I have a mirror actually very close to my desk, because I'm often looking at myself and thinking, now what's my face telling me that I'm thinking right now? And if I have low energy or, kind of bland, then I know I need to bump up the energy a little bit. But really be thinking about what you are bringing to the conversation, because the more positivity you can bring, the more confidence, the more confident you are in your value, the better that conversation with that decision maker is going to go.
Jane Atkinson, I can't thank you enough. This has been such a treat, and no matter how many times I hear you talk or how many times I read through your book, there's always something that we pick up along the way. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Jen McDonough of the Iron Jen radio show. I'm so happy that you were able to do this with me so that I didn't have to be a talking head, just talking to myself on this podcast. So this has been the Wealthy Speaker University podcast. We hope that new speakers have gotten some tips. We hope that speakers who needed a little boost of energy and a little boost of ideas for this next year will have gotten some ideas. If anyone would like more information on any of the things that we've talked about today, they can go to speakerlauncher.com or email me, jane@speakerlauncher.com, and I will be happy to provide you with more information. So thank you, everyone, for now, and this is Jen McDonough and Jane Atkinson saying, have a great day. See you soon, Wealthy Speakers.